Hi guys, this is Mr. Tan, and today we're doing international business and globalization. We are in week 2, PowerPoint slides 3. And today we're looking at, international business strategy and what is strategy and the components of strategy. So in principle, strategy is an integrated set of choices and commitments that supports and sustains the M&Es, multinational enterprises. Competitiveness. It communicates the M&E's plan on how they want to use its resources, capabilities and competences to compete in different countries. And we have to remember it's important to have a strategy because one only has a finite set of resources and revenue flows, and they need to be used in the most efficient and effective way in order to compete in the country that's going to get them the best returns. So the strategy maps out the multinational enterprise's plan to create value both for itself and stakeholders. Importantly, strategy specifies what the M&E will do and what it will not do. Strategy calls on managers to deal with the questions and complexities that follow from cross-checking opportunities with competences, assessing competitive threats and setting and sustaining superior performance. As tough as it sounds, the performance track record of M&Es constantly confirms that managers make this happen, formulating strategies that build endless, clever new ways to build productive and profitable enterprises. The strategy progress table here shows the process and the steps in terms of strategy, in terms of the vision and mission, in terms of the organizing and the operations, in terms of the strategy that the organization wants to adopt, in terms of the value creation, and then the firm performance. And these are obviously going to be affected by the external influences, taking into consideration customer expectations, market conditions, industry structure and drivers, competitive dynamics, integration, imperatives, technology standards and trends, political and legal environments, and the different cultural orientations. So all of these are going to feed into the mission and vision, to the strategy, to the value chain. These are all going to link in to ultimately the organization achieving its mission and vision and aims and objectives. So, we do start with a vision and mission. So what are the vision and mission? So the strategy starts with the vision and mission. The M&E's vision is a future-orientated declaration of its purpose and aspirations outlined by its broad ambitions. It communicates to stakeholders, namely the employees, stakeholders, governments, partners, suppliers, customers and society, with what the M&Es are going to do and the value that will guide all of its efforts. So the mission statement complements the vision. Whereas the vision statement inspires people to dream, the mission statement inspires people to take action. It communicates what the M&E is going to do, why they're going to do, and what general approach they're going to take. Translating the lofty rhetoric of M&E's vision and missions into relevant programs and realistic performance standards, one can only imagine it's going to be tough and it's difficult. Increasing, the challenge for a typical M&E is the fact that the vision and the mission statement must work in many businesses run by many different people operating in many different environments. So ensuring the consistency, of the interpretation and the action spurs the M&Es to synthesize and the ideals and anchor its vision and mission. So strategic planning does so, converting them into reasonable intellectual challenges. The table here outlines some examples of the mission and visions. Adidas, home, Germany, creating the new by focusing on speed, cities and open source. BMW, world leading provider of premium products and premium services for individual mobility. Google, organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And so you've got other examples here of the vision and mission statements from different companies. So how do executives create strategy? Well, we can look at the industrial organization, IO, which, sets the external environment and a primary determinant of the M&E's strategic plan. It emphasizes, the determination of industry structure and the characteristics, for instance, the threat of new entrants, the scale of barriers, the power of buyers and suppliers, direct influence from potential profitability of the M&E strategy. So here we're kind of talking about, I'm sure that you looked at before, Porter's five-force model, and how this actually, when you take all these other things into consideration, how it will then later on shape your strategy by taking the situational information into consideration before you adopt the appropriate strategy. You can also view this in terms of the great by choice outlook. In reality, some industries are and persistently remain far from perfectly competitive. In these settings, proprietary advantage, high entry barriers, oligopolistic dynamics, for instance, produce market imperfections. Consequently, some M&Es earn above earnings, risk-adjusted returns, while others in the same industry underperform. So, in this context, industry structure shapes but does not determine a firm's strategic performance. This table here shows the difference between tangible and intangible resources. Again, if we look at the tangible resources, they can include, employee skills, retail network, scale of distribution network, scale of manufacturing facilities. Intangible may include brand recognition, foreign exchange risk management, intellectual property management skills. So, we can see the resources of a firm, specification and profile, resources of a firm, specification profile. This can also help towards, a firm's competitive, and also help you understand as one element that Porter's diamond model talks about in terms of a nation's competitive advantage in terms of, standard factors, but Porter was talking about more advanced factors that could, in one aspect, give a country's industry an advantage over another companies in that same market sector. So, for instance, in Germany, you have above average factors such as high qualifications in the automotive industry for engineers, which may take 5 or 7 years to actually complete. And these people are well renowned and well recognized and well respected. They're respected as much as we respect doctors here in the UK. So this itself can be a major factor that could help towards giving a company an advantage. So resources, capabilities, and core competences. Well, collectively resources represent stocks of available factors that managers bundle together into capabilities. Managers also transfer resources and capabilities into core competences, difficult to define precisely. Most see a core competence as a stock outlook, skill, or technology that, by synthesizing the links between resources and capabilities, sets and sustains a firm's capacity to create superior value. And superior value, we can see core competences within organizations like just in time. When Toyota first brought out just in time, they reduced their costs significantly by not having warehousing staff, computer systems, holding stock, money in inventory. Instead, the component parts came into the production line on a specified day that was agreed with the suppliers at a specified time, at the right time, then that the component parts were just put onto the production line and onto the car, therefore reducing all their costs. So then this gives that company a competitive advantage in terms of a core competence in terms of how they're doing things within their business, because they are able now to achieve greater gross profit margins just by reducing their costs. So therefore that money could be reinvested elsewhere into R&D, into marketing, into all sorts of areas to gain a greater competitive advantage and superior value to the end consumer. So how do we create value? Well, the authors follow convention and define value in economic terms, specifying it as a difference between the cost of making a product and the price that customers are willing to pay for it. So if an M&E can sell a product for more than what it costs, and it generates profit and hence creates value. When we're talking about, a cost leadership strategy, here these aims here to make a product at the lowest cost relative to those offered by rivals, which appeals to the largest number of potential customers. And we've seen this with Walmart, and Walmart actually state this in their mission and vision. If we're looking at a differentiation strategy, well, M&E's implements a differentiation strategy when it aims to do something no other firm can do. And besides doing it effectively. So just like cost leadership, a differentiation strategy is an integrated set of choices to make a good product or service. Unlike cost leadership strategy, the differentiation strategy requires designing and delivering products that customers see as different in ways that are important to them, and therefore they are willing to pay a premium price for this. So it's a differentiation strategy, but still at possibly a lower cost. And if we're looking at integration, cost leadership, and differentiation strategies, well, success. And now we're looking at the value chain. The value chain is important to get the right service to the customer at the right time and at the right price, but also making sure that the firm's operations are being conducted in the most efficient and effective way, reducing costs to maximize profits. And within the value chain, you have the primary activities, represent the core business functions that make and move products. Its organization follows that of designing a product, and building the operations to make it onward through the tasks of logistics, marketing, distribution, and service. Primary activities reflect classic business activities and managerial orientations. Thus, they carry the function labels such as, operations or marketing. And then you also have the supporting activities. So supporting activities, these represent the infrastructure of the firm, identifying the activities that support the work done in carrying out the primary activities. Human resources, for example, are needed in each primary activity, from supervising warehouse materials to directing production to shipping products and to serving customers. But but these supporting in the firm's infrastructure it's all important to maximizing your profit and reducing your costs. Do you have the right systems, the processes and practices in place? Do you have the right technology in place to allow you to operate in the most efficient and effective way? So all of these are important in terms of the supporting activities in order to make the primary activities actually happen. So, an M&E's option to go anywhere in the world to perform a primary or support activity gives tremendous choice of location. How an M&E distributes value activities around the world is a matter of configuration. Essentially the task of deciding which activity to do where. In theory, configuration ranges from, concentrated. The M&E performs all value chain activities in one location. So dispersed, the M&E performs different value chain activities in different locations, which makes it even more difficult. if we take location advantage, differing environmental conditions, giving different political, legal, and market features means costs differ from country to country. The option to go anywhere to do anything pushes M&Es to exploit location advantages. Labor, capital, and resources costs are traditionally determinants of location advantage. Increasingly, the matters of digitalization and cluster effects moderate configuration choices. Even if you look at various companies like Dyson. Dyson, after supported Brexit, but then after Brexit decided to leave the UK and go elsewhere for to exploit labor, capital, and other resources to get better costs. If you look at Apple will manufacture their products in China, again to give them better location advantage. Economies of scale, again the degree which. So again, these are the configuration choices which we've just discussed in terms of concentrated, dispersed, location advantages, economies of scale, experience and learning effects, and the risk of configuration choices. So this here table shows the motivations and characteristics of global integration versus local responsiveness. Competing in the global marketplace puts the M&Es, in the horns of a dilemma. Should it, single-mindedly standardized products and process and exploit the location's effects in order to maximize the efficiency and gains of global integration, or should it adapt products? And this is really being the question that companies need to consider in terms of their strategy. Do they go for market adaptation or standardization? Because these ultimately affect the product or service design. Are you going to standardize the product, or are you going to adapt the product to different markets with different variations in customers' needs and in terms of what they want and how they operate and their cultural differences? I can remember going to Italy. Italy is a very hot country, and went into McDonald's to get something to eat, and they didn't have any hot tea, but they had iced tea. So they don't sell hot tea in McDonald's in Italy or in hot countries, I presume. But in the UK, obviously, you can buy tea, coffee, and so on and so forth. But it's different for other countries. So they've slightly adapted their product range. But is their product range going to be standardized or adaptation, or is it going to be a combination of the two? So these are some of the considerations that companies would need to consider. So if we look at considerations with global integration or local responsiveness, adaptation or standardization, the greater the potential to standardize value activities, the greater the importance of global integration to an M&E's competitiveness. Responding to local customs and preferences requires customizing products and processes. Adaptation reduces the efficiencies of standardization, thereby aggravating the liability of foreignness, inflating operational costs and reducing value creation. Hence, M&Es oppose adaptation operations unnecessarily. Still, local imperatives often compel them to do so. A third factor are institutional agents and their policy agenda can at different times support either scenario, adaptation or standardization. Various transactional institutions such as the IMF, the WTO, World Trade Organization, and the World Bank build an increasingly seamless global business environment. Systematically, opening national borders to trade and investment creates greater potential for M&Es to build, expand, and integrate global operations. So, mapping and integration operation internationally calls for, configuring and coordinating operations in ways that reconcile and competing demands of global integration and local responsiveness. The integration responsiveness IR grid provides a straightforward framework to organize an analysis. So, do you standardize or do you customize? And I really think it comes down to the customer's needs and the customer's preferences. So if you are just offering a standard product globally, then that's fine if the needs of the customers are such that they will buy those products in that standard form. But if there are competition in that marketplace that have products which have been customized to the needs of their target audiences, which are the same target audience as you have, and at the same or slightly higher price, then if it meets the needs of those customers and those customers are buying those, then you will lose sales from that. So even though, yes, you will save costs and you have more efficient, effective programs by standardization in terms of your processes and practices and your product and your marketing, but on the other hand, there is the potential to lose sales if you. Here we can see the integration responsiveness grid. The integration responsiveness grid, which kind of like determines, if you have low adaptation and decentralization, or high adaptation and decentralization, or low standardization and centralization, or high standardization and centralization. So we're going to look at this and explain this in a little more detail. So if we look at the international corporate level strategies using the IR grid as shown before, then we can see that M&Es competing in markets marked by low pressure for global integration and low responsiveness. So we're talking about the lower left quadrant of the IR grid. Have the flexibility to sell products designed for their home market with minimal, if any, customization for foreign markets. Moreover, more often than not, they face very few, if any, rivals that offer a competitive product. In addition, their superior competitiveness creates the flexibility to, arbitrate locations effects. And given this scenario, managers position the M&E to implement the international strategy. Some M&Es face higher pressure to local responsiveness, but lower pressure to reduce its costs via global integration. So we're talking about the lower right quadrant of the IR grid. So the lower right box. So here the cultural, political, legal and economic conditions in foreign markets require M&Es like J&J, McDonald's, Nestle and HSBC to adapt products and processes to local circumstances. Cost pressures shape but do not determine local competitiveness. Still, offsetting the liability of foreignness as well as providing a reasonable priced alternative to local products requires M&Es to optimize productivity. Efficiently customizing products and processes from market to market. If headquarters aims to direct activity despite high responsiveness pressures, its cost is complicated. So instead, an M&E adopts a localization strategy, orientating its vision, mission, and plans to provide, customers products that fit with their individual and distinctive preferences. If we are looking at the M&Es competing in industries, of sort found in the upper left quadrant of the IR grid, upper left, where they face high pressures for global integration yet low pressures for local responsiveness. Industry effects, press these firms to adopt a global strategy that is keenly sensitive of the economics of efficiency advantage and of standardization and the imperative of integration. So productivity pressures push an M&E to ideally be the cost leader or minimally to compete with the industry, pace setter. And then we have the asystematic demands of maximizing efficiencies through cost leadership and effectiveness via differentiation, making it difficult to pursue both simultaneously. Still, some companies successfully, adopt an integrated cost leadership and differentiation business level strategy. So the corporate level analog here is the transactional, strategy that takes this idea globally, which we can see So now we're going to look at export and import strategy. So exporting and the types of exporters, you know. So what is exporting? Exporting is the sale of goods or services produced by a firm based in one country to customers that reside in another country. And there are different types of exporters, which include the non-exporter. This sort of company commands little or no knowledge about exporting and often has no interest in international trade. Sporadic exporter. This type of customer takes a passive approach to assessing international trade options. It fills, an unsolicited order from the occasional foreign buyer, but prefers to focus on the domestic market. And then you have the regular exporter, the company that aggressively pursues export sales as a profitable strategic activity. Is a regular exporter. And I know for the first company that I worked for, which was Metro Products. We were selling the mechanical steering wheel immobilizer stop lock, and this was a very, very successful product. And we were doing exhibitions at the NEC. We were doing, in fact, exhibitions in Frankfurt in Automechanica. We did an exhibition at the Sands in Las Vegas, and we weren't a regular exporter where we had set up operations elsewhere, but we had a lot of interest from people from other countries that wanted to buy our products, and agents wanted to buy our products. So the company set up an export manager, which was a domestically based operation with a head office and an export manager at head office based in Oxted. And then we had the foreign agents who we would go into an agreement with, and they would buy the stock from us and then sell with a license agreement in that country to market that product. So we was more like a sporadic type exporter because the company didn't want to lose the sales. And who wants to lose sales unnecessarily when there is no need to? So export advantages. What are some of the export advantages? We have ownership advantages. Managers bundle resources and capabilities to develop core competences that, in defining the firm's competitive advantage, influence it and how it enters the foreign market. We have location advantages. The combination of high sales opportunities and low investment risk in foreign markets creates favorable export conditions. And internalization advantages. Companies often respond to uncertainties caused by market imperfections by initializing market processes. That is, conducting a transaction within a controlled, confines of a company rather than the open, imperfect market. So when you're looking at this, there is the complexity posed by different cultural, political, legal, and economic environmental imposes a so-called liability of foreignness. The idea holds that foreign companies, by virtue of their spotty familiarity, incur additional economic and social costs by doing business overseas. Companies offset this liability by capitalizing on their advantage, as well as selecting the mode of international business that best reflects their resources profile and their risk tolerance, because it comes down to risk. How much risk do you want to take on board? The largest companies are the biggest exporters, SMEs, small to medium enterprises. However, are steadily expanding export actively. And it is depending upon the route that you want to take. It will depend upon the amount of risk that you want to take. And even if you take Tesco's and how Tesco's expanded into the US and had to compete with Walmart, and they couldn't do it, and eventually they pulled out of the US. So what are some of the exporting motivations? Well, some of these motivations include, increased profitability, obviously, increased productivity, and diversity in terms of activities. Increased profitability. Exporting, opens opportunities to create more profits. Often companies sell their products for higher prices abroad than at home foreign markets may lack competitive alternatives, or they may not be. They may be at different stages of the product life cycle. So again, and another reason in terms of profitability, it might be you may have increased competition from your home market. So you may need to look for other markets if you haven't gone for a market saturation, or if the market is already saturated in your domestic market. Improve profitability. Exporting helps companies to improve productivity, creating options to use scarce resources such as capital and labor more efficiently. So productivity is linked to increasing the economies of scale, exploiting, a capacity, or spreading costs over time. Customers improve efficiency. And diversity activities. Exporting diversifies activities, thereby fortifying a firm's adaptability to business cycles and disruptive innovations. Serving customers in different markets reduces a firm's vulnerability to the loss of a buyer, while safeguarding its bargaining power with suppliers. So again, diversifying your activities. And again, I know from the first company I worked for, we had in the UK, we dealt with a wide range of buyers. We didn't just deal with the multinational companies like Halfords, B&Q's, Texas, but we also dealt with the independent motorist stores as well, the independent stores. So the multinational stores kind of like represented 55% of the company's business, whereas the independent stores represented another 45. So therefore, kind of like reducing the risk on one type of retail outlet buyer. So when we look at the exporting views, there predominantly are two views on exporting. So we can look at the incremental internationalization and the born global phenomenon. So we look at the incremental internationalization, which is what our company adopted. We were going into other countries, but we were doing it on a very slow and very incremental basis. But this did start to increase. This view developed in the 1980s and 1990s and sees physical distance, cultural ties, and market circumstances fundamentally shaping how a company approaches and engages export. Specifically, export activity follows a sequence of processes that leads a company to sell initially from its home market to geographically and psychologically proximate countries. From there, its methodology expands, systematically exporting to more dissimilar and distant countries. And I would agree with that. That's exactly the kind of approach that our company adopted. Then you had the born global phenomenon. The international entrepreneur literature reports that in some firms initiate exporting as a born global, also known as instant international or micronational or international new venture, rather than methodically engaging a sequence of increasing dissimilar foreign markets. Born global steps into the world stage immediately upon their founding or soon after. They regard their home as just one big market of many opportunities in the whole world. When we look at the different approaches to exporting, well, we can see that there are direct exporting, indirect exporting, and approaches. So which one do you think you would use if you had to do this? So direct exporting, in this scenario, the company directly sells its products to an independent intermediary, such as an agent or distributor or retailer, outside of its home country. The intermediary then sells the product on to a local consumer, and that's exactly what we did. We had direct exporting, which we used an agent to sell into other countries. But direct exporting requires a company to manage the export process, minding all aspects of making and marketing the product. And then you have the indirect exporting. Indirect exporting, some companies prefer to do what they do best and outsource the rest. So in this situation, they enlist independent distributors, agents, or export managers, companies to ship, market, and sell their goods abroad. Operationally, the company sells its products to an independent intermediary in the domestic market, which then exports its products to its foreign agents, who then sell to the end consumer. So again, we can see two different methods of exporting. And when we compare the two approaches, well, no export approach is instinctively superior. At the broadest level, a company's particular ownership, location, and international advantages determine the optimum approach. Technology influences the relative merits of the various approaches, and the internet makes direct exporting increasingly efficient and effective by providing immediate low-cost means, and lets regular exporters, particularly born globals, easily access their more markets. Export approaches are not mutually exclusive. A firm can engage different methods to trade different approaches and products to serve different markets. So it's and I think it all comes down to how much risk and how much time a company, and also going back to the mission, vision, and their strategy, and how aggressive. When we look at import drivers, there are various import drivers, including specialization of labor, import optimization, local unavailability, and diversification. When we're looking at specialization of labor, managers usually divide a production or process into a sequence of separate yet interdependent steps, and assign workers to particular steps, so that one worker does one task and another task, and so on. So the specialization of labor organizes production to achieve economies of scale, and then you get those people specializing in that labor becoming extremely good at doing that, and efficient and effective, and specialized at doing that. So here we can see the inverse relationship between the quantity produced and the per unit of fixed costs, as well as trying to exploit the location economies, different wage rates and material costs across different countries. You also have import optimization. So companies, import goods from foreign suppliers in order to get lower costs. This is imperative in industries where competitive rivalry, imposes persistent cost pressures, such as we see in telecommunications and business services. Import optimization is very, very important. I can remember that, as a manufacturer of a product, and you were trying to sell this product, the stop lock, into a company like Halfords, who has over 500 stores in the UK. Well, every time you went to the buyer would only talk about one thing, and the buyer would only talk about margin. How much margin are you going to give us? How much margin are you going to give us? They were always, you were reluctant to go and see the buyer at any one time, because all he was going to talk about was margin and how much you were going to give him off your product. So you were constantly looking at ways to cutting a cost with your suppliers of your component parts, and you need to actually look at the optimization of your component parts and your suppliers. You have local unavailability. The WTO, World Trade Organization, identifies and expanded the scope of choice as a chief benefit of import. Importing lets local markets improve the variety of their offerings, providing consumers with products that are either unavailable locally, or they can serve as competitive substitutes, or to local options. And local unavailability, again, look at the UK, look at Tesco's and the products that they sell, look at the vegetables. If you think about a vegetable, pat choy is, a Chinese vegetable that you could only get from Chinese supermarkets, and now you can get them in Lidl, and they only cost 99 pence. Whereas in the Chinese store, they cost about £3. So again, it does help to make more products available. Diversification, importers diversify by tapping international markets to develop options. Diversification through importing, lets companies find higher quality, lower cost products and services, thereby making it less valuable, and that dictates to the local supply or business cycle. So, who are the importers? You have import optimizers, opportunists, and arbitrageurs. And the import optimizers, this type of importer uses foreign sourcing to optimize in terms of the price or quality and inputs fed into its supply chain. The opportunist, this type of importer looks for the products around the world that it can import and profitably sell to local citizens. Arbitrators, in theory, goods sold in one market should sell for the same price in another. But in practice, prices vary due to the gaps resulting from market regulation, trade inefficiencies, political risks, and other factors. So, what are some of the problems and pitfalls to exporting? Well, these are going to include a range of different things, including financial risk, customer management, international business expertise, marketing challenges, top management commitment, government regulation, and trade documentation. Financial constraints pose tough impediments to international traders. In a survey of over 978 SMEs asked their perceptions to trade barriers, and the greatest problem that was mentioned was a shortage of working capital to finance export. From these respondents, 81 financial concerns were to do with payments and taxation, consistently affect companies, big and small, in both manufacturing and in the services industries. We have customer management. An enduring barrier to exporting is misunderstanding the difficulty of profitability serving customers in foreign markets. International business expertise. International traders, like most managers dealing with foreign markets, must understand local business practice. Very important. Marketing challenges. Regularly complain about the high shipment costs and logistic demands, weak foreign market connections, difficulties in matching foreign rivals' prices, effectively promoting products, and establishing distribution networks and tailoring after sales service programs. You have top management commitment, management characteristics, especially executives. International outlook and risk orientation influence export and import activity. For many reasons, companies, like particularly the SMEs, focus on domestic rather than foreign markets. Again, going back to risk and time involved. Government regulation, export and import inefficiencies persist due to delays, documentation, administration fees. The rules and regulations governing trade, notwithstanding the success of the WTO, endure. The New Jersey-based Scepter cohorts manufacturing and distributing of high quality customized dyes and colorants runs into problems because the import regulations differ from one country to another. And then you have trade documentation, a battery of documents regardless of international trade. And again, we've even seen that with Brexit. And with Brexit, the biggest complaint about delays is the documentation. And the government recently, due to the transportation and no lorry drivers or very little lorry drivers, and therefore creating supply problems, had to kind of like diminish and minimize the documentation that's required. So we see this table here. Here are some of the barriers to exporting, and we can break this down to manufacturing and the services industry. And you can see what some of these companies are saying. At the highest for the SMEs and large firms, you're talking about transportation and the shipping costs, language and the cultural barriers, difficulty in terms of locating sales prospects, foreign regulators, US regulators, and so on and so forth, and the list goes on. So it's important to know what you're actually getting into and what you actually need to do in the market that you're going for. Trade documentation required for exporting. Table types of export documents in the bill of lading, certificate of origin, commerce invoice, electronic export packaging list, pro forma invoice, and these are just some of the documentation. And there is a lot more that you will need when you are exporting. So export assistance, there are various agencies, public agencies like the U.S. Commercial Services Office, and then you have private agencies like the EMC, ETC, freight forwarders, 3PLs, brokers trading, and public agencies, agents and services in the United States. SMEs can start at the nearest commercial service office, the trade promotion arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. In Japan, one of the contracts, JETRO, while in the United States and the United Kingdom, like similar organizations worldwide, they are government-related units that promote trade and investment, particularly helping SMEs to exploit export potential. If we look at the private agencies, well, the private agencies in terms of export management company and EMC, by acting as the international trade arm of a company, helps firms establish overseas markets. Export Trading Company, the ETC, in 1982, United States instituted the Export Trading Company Act, thereby permitting US firms to collaborate with each other to reduce their export costs, improve export efficiency, and in turn compete more effectively in export markets. You have the freight forwarders, popularly known as the travel agents of cargo. Freight forwarders are the largest export-import intermediary in terms of the value and weight of products shipped internationally. Operationally, upon finalizing foreign trade, an exporter hires a freight company. You have third-party logistics, 3PLs. An agent is a fast-growing force in international trade. Like freight forwarders, 3PLs move cargo across global markets. Unlike freight forwarders, 3PLs collaborate with manufacturers, shippers, and retailers, to relieve them of the logistics responsibilities of transportation, warehousing, cross-docking, inventory management, packaging, and freight forwarding. And then you have brokers trading. Internationally requires understanding relevant customs regulations and policies, knowing how to clear goods through customs, assigning the appropriate customs duties, and complying with special procedures. So again, all these are things that you might. This table here outlines some of the questions that should be asked when putting together, an export plan. So successful exporters citing the notion that companies don't plan to fail, they fail to plan, indicate that developing an export plan, manages these demands. An export plan prioritizes markets, formalizes top management buy-ins, organizes trade activities, and focuses market scenarios. So here we look at countertrade. So what are countertrade? Common forms and countertrades includes a barter, buyback, offset, switch and swap trading, and counter purchase. These are all different forms of counter trades. And if we look at the counter trades, consider the following transactions. Coca-Cola had traded its syrup for cheese from the Soviet Union, oranges from Egypt, tomato paste from Turkey, beer from Poland, and soft drink bottles from Hungary. Malaysia swapped palm oil for fertilizer and machinery with North Korea, Cuba, and Russia, and negotiated similar deals with Morocco, Jordan, and Syria, and Iran. So Thailand, the world's largest exporter of rice, uses rice for oil deals with Middle Eastern countries. Boeing exchanged 10 747s for 34 million barrels of Saudi Arabian oil. Chinese companies agreed to build a coal mine, a power station, and a dam in Zimbabwe, with revenue from the mine being used to repay the loan. These sorts of trades fall under the umbrella term of countertrade. So any one of these several different arrangements that parties use to trade products via transactions that use limited or no currency or credit to qualify as a countertrade. So I hope today's lesson has been beneficial, and if you need to look at this video again, by all means have a look at this video, and then if you have any questions, please ask me when you next see me. So thank you today from Mr. Tan.